Welcome to the episode of Safe Space, the podcast for next gen family business leaders. Today we're joined by Tom McCullough out of Toronto. Tom, welcome to the show.
Great. Thanks for having me.
So before we get started, Tom, maybe a little bit of background about you, how you started the firm, the journey of the firm, and then we'll get into the show.
Yeah, sounds good. Well, our firm is called Northwood Family Office. It was formed in 2003, which is coming up to 20, well, I guess it's past 22 years. We've been operating as a multifamily office in Toronto, looking after primarily Canadian families, primarily folks that have sold businesses, but lots of other types as well. Typically $30 million to $1 billion is our typical family net worth range. But I thought I might just tell you the origin story a little bit because it's people have told me they thought it was interesting. So I spent 20 years at a company called Dominion Securities, which is an investment firm in Toronto, Canada, currently owned by the Royal Bank. And I had a great experience there. It was just a spectacular firm, spectacular experience. But I was there for 20 years. So sort of three things happened to me. One is I was there for 20 years and thought, am I going to do this forever? So that's always a good question. Two is I come from a family full of entrepreneurs. I've got about 26, 27 first cousins on one side of my family. And most of them who work are entrepreneurs. And so I'm sort of this lone corporate guy and always thinking, all these guys are entrepreneurs. Maybe I should do it. So I think it was in my blood to do something entrepreneurial at some point in my life. And the third thing is our family, my parents essentially, were looking for what I would now call a family office. This is 25 years ago. And I didn't really know what it was back in the day, but we were looking for somebody who could pull all the pieces together, make sure everything was organized. They didn't have a separate agenda to sell a product. They could connect all the dots, and we couldn't find it in Canada. This is 25 years ago. And they say the best entrepreneurs are frustrated consumers. I was a frustrated consumer trying to find a solution for our family. It's interesting. I went to a trusted advisor, my dad's accountant, and great guy. And I basically told him this story, and he said, well, you can buy insurance or you can do an estate freeze. It was about a minute and a half conversation. And he sent me on my way with my problem still. So in some ways, I'm glad he did that because it really made me think, wow, maybe this is the moment I should leave Dominion Securities, start my own business, and make it a family office. And 23 years later, we are a multifamily office, and I've just enjoyed it immensely. And we've got about 36, 37 staff and look after about 100 families.
So fast forward over that period of time, you've written 3 books, you've grown the firm, you've got a lot of insight and knowledge. How would you say the family office space has changed over the last 22, 23 years from an advisor perspective and then from a client consumer perspective?
Right. Well, I think in both cases, people didn't know what they were 25 years ago. In fact, people used to ask me, what do you do? And I would say in the early days, I would say I'm involved in a family office. And they said, oh, is that like birth control and family counseling? And I said, well, not exactly. And I would have to explain this thing. Well, of course, now everybody's a family office or claims to be. So it's really gone through just a massive, I'll say recognition spurt. The number of family offices I know have increased, but just, the recognition, it's sort of like a hot territory. And so everybody's claiming to be one, whether they are one or not. And who even knows exactly what the definition is? Certainly single family offices have, there's many, many different kinds. But no, I think so. I think what happens in that case is it ends up being quite confusing for the client because they don't know what they're getting and they don't know who to go to help them sort it out. So it's one of the reasons I got involved with an organization out of New York called the Ultra High Net Worth Institute, and its goal essentially, it's a not-for-profit think tank, and its goal was to help ultra high net worth and high net worth families sort through this issue, bring some independence and say, what is an integrated advisor? What is a family office? What's a hub? What's a spoke? How do you make good choices with no agenda beyond trying to help them? And I've tried to do that a lot in my own, with the books I've written. I teach an MBA course at the University of Toronto. I've taught there for 15 years. And we do a program for families on private family wealth. So all of those things, and our firm has been trying to help people think through these issues and find the family office that they're looking for.
And what do you think are the top two main issues that you've encountered with families?
Two that come to mind. One is, I think people are operate on an ad hoc basis. So they are not integrated. They don't have a game plan. And I think that makes most of the decisions they make suboptimal. So it's just, amazing. The number of people that come in are worth $100 million and have this random collection of investments, stuff. Yes, stuff. Exactly. And so, and I think they end up, there's really no game plan. And so one of the things that we end up bringing in, and good family offices bring, is the sense of clarity in all areas of their life. And I mean all areas, really, all, not just financial, but what's the purpose of the wealth, and who do we want to be as a family? And because those things all tie together, and there's an integrated plan with somebody on top of it. And it just brings such, it's an overused term, but really peace of mind and confidence to people. On the other hand, the second item, you asked for two, the second one is, people often ask me in one of the books I wrote is called, or co-wrote with Keith Whitaker, who's a fantastic co-author. It's called Wealth of Wisdom, the Top 50 Questions Wealthy Families Ask. And people always ask me, what's the top question? What's the main question? And unfortunately, there isn't a single one, but there is one main category, and that is kids and money. And I would say, and I'd love to hear your views on this, because it wouldn't surprise me if they're similar, that is one of the biggest challenges that people feel they have. They've got all this money, they want to help, but they're afraid that helping will hurt. So I would say that is, has been an issue from the beginning. But, as people age and as kids age, kids meaning adult children, often cases, it's closer to reality, and the rubber's meeting the road, and people are afraid that, the helping will hurt.
Yeah, in our experience, excuse me, in the work we do around relational and emotional governance, is when we look at, the issue is really a parental issue. It's not a business issue, it's not an ownership issue. And the issue is, how do I, as a parent, prepare the children, whatever age they may be, to one day handle or take over the wealth? And if you ask those parents, can you clearly articulate or define what prepared means? They don't have an answer. So the default is, well, we're going to send them to university. Well, that's an education. We're going to get them job experience. Well, that's job experience. What does prepared mean, right? And we've seen that this has been a real issue since we started the firm. So we've just recently engaged in a research around preparedness. And happy to talk to you about that offline about it, because we're just finishing the final details. But it's about preparedness, because you've got, and when you look at preparedness, there's two sides to the equation. There's prepared to let go from a founder perspective, and there's prepared to receive from a next generation perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So how are we equipping both groups to be prepared emotionally?
Yeah, very interesting. I think that'll be extremely valuable. It is. I think it's the issue that keeps people up at night.
We've worked with a number of families across the globe, and we're starting to see a common theme in that a lot of families have, the family constitutions, family charters, that sort of document, and they call that governance. And they assume that document, that governance, deals with family dynamics. I just saw a really interesting article yesterday from Barron's that basically says, the biggest risk to family wealth is to family.
Yeah.
Right. Which doesn't, it doesn't surprise you and I. Right.
Yeah.
So these documents aren't dealing with the real issues. Because if you and I are siblings, and for some reason we don't trust each other or like each other or respect each other, we can have all the meetings we want, but we're not going to get stuff done because that is in the way.
Absolutely.
And I think the issue, the industry, but that I mean advisors and families, have this misconception that family charters and family constitutions deal with family dynamics, and they don't.
Yeah, no, I think you're bang on, and I think the idea of preparation is key. And it always reminds me that a lot more time is spent, they say, preparing the money for the heirs versus preparing the heirs for the money. And I think, as you say, also preparing the parents to be the givers, not just the kids to be the receivers. But it's in fact, it's interesting. We've just been through this with my own family. I've got two kids in their 30s, and we over the last 18 months have just been through this ourselves. And it's very interesting, to like, I give lots of advice to people on how to do this and walk with them through it. But when you do it yourself, you also need a guide. And so I got my business partner, who has done this for years and years, to sit down with our family and help us think through these issues. Because what often happens, I find, is that, the not, I'll say one of the parents or both of the parents, often the father, especially if you're, well, it depends who's involved in the financial part of the business, but you default into that role. And I wanted to make sure, and my kids wanted to make sure, that I was a participant, not a leader, in that setting, which I think was absolutely correct. Anyway, this was sort of our moment of disclosure and of details, and inviting the kids into the journey with us. We talked about, instead of it being like, my wife and I being the wealth owners and the kids here, is there a way that we could move to something like this, where we figured it out together, and we admitted we didn't really know what that meant, but were they interested in joining us in the journey of sort of figuring out what this, all could look like. And they're in their one's 35 and one's 32. And there's a great article, a great chapter in one of our books, and the author of that chapter talks about the importance of kids earning their way into adulthood. And that's just by living life. Sometimes it's having a job and paying bills, and maybe having a mortgage, and maybe getting married and having kids, who knows. But all those things earn your way into adulthood, and part of that is that preparation to, take on something significant, like having some financial resources to manage. So we felt the time, you never know what's right and what's wrong, and only time will tell, I suppose. But but it was really good. It's been very, very good. Kids stepped up, very interested in being involved and doing their part. And and it also, what it showcases, I think, is it showcases the values that, you think you've instilled. You never really know until the moment comes.
Yes.
You do the best you can. But my wife and I both thought, that the kids were handled it beautifully. And so it's been a joyful, I'd say, journey the last 18 months.
No, that's fantastic, Tom. I'm so glad to hear that you're doing that, because what happens is the industry focuses on, as you said, preparing the money for the kids. And it's about not just that, it's about preparing the individuals for the emotions and perspectives associated with the wealth. Right? Because if I have, we did some work with a client um, where he was transitioning wealth to his kids for tax purposes. And he was concerned about how his daughter was handling the money. So he brought us in, and we were able to help, her understand that her beliefs about money, where money can't keep me safe and it and it's dangerous. So she would push money away. So until people understand what their perspectives are about, money, power, responsibility, leadership, family, that perspective is going to get in the way of the real conversations.
And it reminds me of some of the work of Jay Hughes, who you will obviously know, but those who don't, he's a, one of the thought leaders in the family wealth field. He talks about something like 80% of trust beneficiaries see the wealth as, or the trust rather, as a burden, which is unbelievable, really. Now, that's a trust, so that's got some implications, but I think there's probably some large percentage who see wealth that's been inherited as a burden in some ways. And you think to yourself, how could that be? And of course, we know how it could be because it was delivered with not no context. And in fact, Jay Hughes talks about inheritance in one of his books as a meteor that crashes into the person's world, and they've got no preparation for it. It blows a hole in their environment, and yet with some preparation, and it's never going to be perfect, but with some preparation and some messaging and open conversation, it can be a positive and not a meteor.
Well, the thing is what happens is, the founders don't feel that way because they've spent their lifetime creating it, right? And the kids, in most cases, are the beneficiaries of the founders' hard work. And one of our basic human needs as human beings is the need to contribute and to feel significant. And if I haven't done anything, and all of a sudden I'm getting a boatload of money, there's going to be guilt, and there
Yeah,
will be shame.
yeah, yeah,
I recently facilitated a family meeting in Australia, and one of the kids said, "You know what? We're basically part of the, as she put it, lucky sperm club. We're just born into it, and for that I feel enormous guilt and shame. And
yeah,
unless those conversations happen,
yeah,
the perspective of wealth, of guilt and shame, gets in the way of the planning, and
yeah,
then it becomes a burden."
yeah. It's
And
true.
the reason we did this research is because not enough folks are talking about the emotional side of wealth.
Yeah. It also reminds me of the I can't remember where I read it, but somewhere recently, this odd thing about entrepreneurs who start a business, and once they're successful, people often ask them about the business and how were they successful, and often it comes back to difficulties that they overcame and built perseverance and strength, and it took them to new heights. And then they have made this money, which they then want to give to their kids so they can avoid all
Struggling.
those difficulties. And it's done out of love. It's not done
Yeah.
out of not done out of to try and make things difficult. It's to avoid difficulties. But of course, part of those difficulties are what builds who we are. And it's a really interesting challenge for families with normal amounts of money, let's call it. We often say that the bank account is the boss. We can afford it or we can't afford it. Well, all the families we deal with, and probably all the ones you deal with, they can afford much of what they would want to do. So they have to have other reasons for deciding what to do and not to do and how to support kids. And I think it's good that you do the work you do, because it's very, very important. And oftentimes, as you say, it's skipped over in place of getting a tax plan or finding a new investment. Those are little tools in a much bigger picture that has to be managed.
And you just talked about the perspective of the founder or the wealth creators, guilt and shame. Because what happens is, yes, they created the wealth. I was having a conversation with a client of mine from Australia just the other day. Spent this enormous time creating the wealth, so all the time was here creating the wealth. And if time is over here, that means time with kids and family is not there. So that's a sacrifice for the wealth creation. And then when the wealth is created, they go, well, I want to balance it out. I want to balance out the balance sheet of time with buying them a house, making life easier financially. But you don't make up lost time with a checkbook. You make up lost time with time, right? And that's where there's a disconnect.
Sounds like cats in the cradle. It's we're gonna have a good time then. It's a challenge that everybody faces. There's no question.
And there's the humanness that which is why we do what we do, because the humanness piece, in my opinion, has to be uncovered and talked about. Because if we don't feel emotionally safe with ourselves or each other, it's pretty hard to come together and manage wealth, because, wealth puts pressure on people. It just does.
It does.
And we have to be equipped to be able to handle that pressure. As a client of mine says, privilege can crush.
Hmm. So somebody said, I can't remember who it was, that wealth is an amplifier of all things. So good things. It gives tons of opportunities and pleasure and so on. But it also is an amplifier in terms of all the things you're talking about that can be difficult and challenging. So it blows everything up bigger
Yeah.
than for an average person.
So whenever I speak to groups, I talk about what do you get when you squeeze an orange? Well, you get orange juice. When you squeeze a human being through the pressure of wealth, other pressures, you get what they're really made of. So to your point, if someone is a good person, the more wealth, the nicer they are. If they're egotistical, narcissistic, self-centered, there'll be more of that, right?
Yeah, but we all have both of those things in us,
We
don't we?
do, we
So
do.
it's a matter of which you feed and which and can too much too soon in some cases draw on your the worst parts of you, and can something that's moderate and with good messaging help uh, motivate the best parts of you. And I guess that's what we all want for our kids.
Yeah, yeah. So tell me, where do you see the family office space going over the next 20 years?
Yeah, that's a great question. When we started the business 22, 23 years ago, we wanted to be Wayne Gretzky, famous Canadian hockey player, and who always said wants to skate where the puck's going to be, not where the puck is. So we thought for 20 years we were skating to where the puck was going to be, and it turns out I think that was probably pretty accurate. We started this integrated family wealth family office, and now there's lots and lots of people doing that. So now it's a little bit of a tougher question the next 20 years. Who knows what the world's going to be like in the next 20 years, given all that's going on. But um, I wrote a piece for the Journal of Wealth Management in the summer of 2023 called The Rise of the Integrated Advisor. And my thesis was that this integrated advisor person who's knowledgeable horizontally across the client, not so much vertically. And the verticals would be, accountants and lawyers and family therapists and insurance people and business consultants, and we, rather, the integrated advisor is this horizontal organization, and our focus is the client. And we know quite a bit about all the areas, but not everything that a vertical person would know. And so my thesis is that this role has been rising up over in various places over the last, whatever it is, 15 or 20 years. Family office is one of the names, but it shows up in other places as well. And because the world is much, much more complicated, and it needs more integration. And it's interesting how, if you think about in the paper, there's an example about a family buying a 600-acre piece of property next to their ski chalet, and just all the implications of that one quote little decision. It was a little decision for that family because of the amount of money they had. And it's everything from, well, where's the money going to come from? Do we have it? Do we have to sell things? Are there tax implications? How should it be held, like in a trust? Who would be the trustees? Do we involve the kids in the decision? Is this a decision we make ourselves? Who's going to have governance over it? How do people feel about it from an environmental standpoint? Do we want to allow development? This is just one little tiny decision, and there's thousands of decisions people make in a lifetime, and hundreds in a year probably. But all of these things are connected. I always use the example of a hand. It looks like these four things are totally independent, but they're all connected. I just am increasingly convinced every day of my life that uh, a family that is clear on their goals and their objectives, and most are not when they come in. Because people, if you put a gun to somebody's head proverbially and say, what are your goals? People often don't know. You have to talk them through it, help them figure it out. And then once we have those goals and we build a game plan that clearly is set out to meet those goals, and then you manage it efficiently so the goals are met where they can be. It's just a different way to live as opposed to stabbing blindly at all these different individual issues. In fact, a perfect example, just the other day, there was an article in, and there's an online magazine in Canada called Canadian Family Offices. And the question was, how do you invest $10 million? And they called on 4 experts to say how to invest $10 million. And all of the examples were individual, somebody said real estate, and somebody said, international stocks, and somebody said this. And nobody said that I remember said, well, tell me about the family. What's their situation? No sense of who the investor was, just the investments. And I think that's just investments, but it could tie to any other individual vertical. All of these things have to get connected. So I believe that, people will, I think there is a movement toward and recognition by families that they need somebody to play some kind of integrated role. Maybe it's themselves. If they've got skills and ability and time and interest, maybe they can do it. Or they have to find somebody. And for those people who think, well, this is some newfangled thing, I always say to entrepreneurs, well, who ran your business? You had a CEO of the business, maybe it was you or somebody you hired, and there was sales sitting around the table. There was sales and marketing and legal and admin, and those people all met on a regular basis to plot strategy and execute. What is the difference if you have a $100 million operating business or $100 million in liquid assets? You still need a CEO. And if it's not going to be you, it's got to be somebody, as opposed to these random experts in particular areas that never meet, and there's no central game plan. So if I sound passionate about it, I am, because I think I think the outcomes are so much better for families. And so I do believe that over the next 20 years, I do believe that there will be a continuation of the movement toward integrated advice. And I believe and hope that probably there will be some kind of accreditation or clarification for families to know what it is that they're getting. And the Ultra Net Worth Institute is just one example, but I'm involved in that one, and we've been pretty proactive in trying to bring some clarity for families to make good choices.
So, Tom, we're coming to the end of the show. Like I knew it'd fly by. So I always like to ask my guests the same question, and that's one piece of advice based on your experience and knowledge over the last 20 plus years that you could offer the senior generation and the current generation.
Well, there's a great quote that says the two things that parents should give their children are roots and wings. And I think that maybe is the advice to both. Roots basically would be love, education, stability, self-confidence, self-worth, and a good home and support and so on. But wings is the opposite. It's not the togetherness, it's the individuation. How do you find your own path? How do you not be dominated by the shadow of this person who started a business, who they call G1? What happened to the people before G1? They didn't exist? No, but often, parents want to control and kids feel under the thumb. And so if people can, if the older generation can play the role of providing roots, but also be proactive in giving wings. And if the next gen can respect the roots, continue to be part of the family, but pursue their own vision without thinking that they're just under the shadow of this other person, I think families end up being way better off and can have great conversations.
Okay. So, Tom, that's great advice. Give them roots and wings. And if folks wanted to find you, how do they find you?
NorthwoodFamilyOffice.com.
Okay. So, Tom, thank you so much for your time. It's been truly amazing to get caught up, hear your wisdom, and just to catch up. And folks, as you know, guests donate their time, they donate their resources, as do we, to make this show for you. So, if anything that Tom and I spoke to you really speaks out, please drop us a note. And the most important thing is share. Share the show with your friends so they don't feel lonely as well. Tom, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks, Franco. Much appreciated.